At TradeTech, we're primarily involved in uranium price reporting and market analysis. This revolves around a core set of values that represents our unique experience and expertise. And our primary objective is to provide our clients with the most reliable and unbiased information available anywhere in the marketplace. To do this, we've assembled a team of individuals worldwide with a diverse set of skills from utility fuel buying, government policy, market economics, and mineral economics and geology. I'm the market economics guy. So as we set out on our day today, I'd like to provide some context as to what's going on in the uranium market. And the long and short of it is that prices are up. I remember in late 2016, I think uranium was $17.75 a pound. There was decorative stone at Home Depot that was more expensive than uranium. Okay. At the end of September, we reported prices at $73.15 per pound U3O8. So a remarkable recovery in prices. I'm going to throw some stats out at you. Prices up 45% in 6 months, 52% in the last year, and 144% over the last 3 years. It's at its highest level in 12 years, and term prices are up as well. Now, the current rise in market prices is rooted in several developments, including increased demand for uranium related to growing support for nuclear power globally. That's really rooted in an evolution in government policy. Governments now include funding for existing power plants, advanced power reactor designs, and perhaps most importantly, domestic supplies of nuclear fuel. And policymakers have recognized that nuclear power can contribute in a meaningful way to reducing carbon emissions while increasing energy security. And this is translated to and is also fed by, it's kind of a feedback loop with public support, which has increased for nuclear power as well over the last few years. And I think this trend is vitally important, not only to our industry, but to our broader goal of establishing a clean energy pipeline that affords people access to clean sources of electricity. And nuclear power plays a key role in this because it checks a lot of boxes, right? It's carbon free at the source of generation. Nuclear power plants are being licensed to run for 60, 80, there's talk of 100 years. And its fuel source is incredibly dense, making it one of, if not the most efficient ways to generate electricity. Now, nuclear power supply chains, however, have proven to be uniquely vulnerable. And let me explain what I mean by that. Uranium prices have declined over the past decade, largely due to oversupply on the supply side and unfavorable economics on the demand side, both of which combine to push nuclear fuel prices down. Now, this led buyers to seek cheaper sources of uranium in order to make their nuclear power generation operations competitive. And one way they did that was to seek fuel from foreign sources, such as Russia, because they were cost competitive, price competitive. But that decision was not without risk. And we've seen in recent years how Russia will contrive scarcity to leverage its political will over countries that rely on its exports for energy production. Now, this is a calculated risk that buyers have taken, where the price of fuel is measured against the likelihood that the seller will deliver. This is what we call security of supply, and many buyers today are prioritizing security of supply over lower prices. And this choice is being enabled by policies that are leveling the playing field for nuclear power against other sources of generation through direct funding, tax breaks, and other supportive policies. So let's take a look at supply and demand. These trends also show us that we're going to need a lot of uranium in the coming years. We estimate the global requirements are expected to steadily rise from around 180 million pounds U3O8 today toward 250 million pounds U3O8 by 2040. What this demand outlook shows is that the market has pivoted almost overnight from being in the doldrums to what could arguably be described as another renaissance, which is great because that indicates that our industry is not only supported, but is also growing. But there's a caution here, and that's that this demand cycle must be sustainable, because these policy developments, geopolitical developments, and market developments come at a time when the nuclear fuel market is faced with a structural supply deficit, as shown on this chart. And this deficit has several roots. Several projects were taken offline in the 2010s for economic reasons. Then COVID interrupted production at some of the largest mines. And now, over the last couple of years, we've seen a notable rise in the volume of uranium purchased by producers and financial funds. Today, the market is short by around 60 million pounds U3O8. And by 2030, that number could grow to 75 million pounds with only modest increases in demand. If expansions in nuclear power were to meet even the most basic requirements of carbon mitigation promises, that deficit could be much higher. And this net growth in uranium requirements could have a significant additional upside if governments and power markets truly embrace advanced reactor designs, such as small modular reactors. In other words, if this industry is successful in bringing nuclear power to the forefront, we're going to need more projects than are currently identified in our supply stack, because these reactor requirements are drawing against an established supply base that is being depleted every day. And there's not been enough investment capital flowing to project development over the last 10 years. Now, one of the questions we get, or one of the questions we're often asked is, when will the utilities start buying? Well, they are, and they have been. Last year, 2022, volumes transacted in the term market were well above average, and in fact, 2022 represented the third largest year in terms of term contracting since 2010. I'll take that back, since 2001. Today, utilities are vetting any potential supplier to ensure that they will be able to meet future commitments. And this involves an evaluation based not only on price, but on the evaluated price that includes factors that weigh past delivery performance, jurisdictional risk, environmental, social, and corporate governance, and their ability to deliver material on time. So what will ensure the availability of future supply? Well, firstly, a rising requirements trend paints an optimistic picture of the demand side going forward. The capital is flowing to nuclear power from governments and from the private sector, and we're witnessing an historic level of policy support for nuclear power that has emerged in several countries in the last couple of years. And there's a notable trend in preserving existing capacity through legislated economic support. I can't stress that point enough. What we've seen coming out of Washington, perhaps, most notably, is capital meant to preserve existing capacity. We've had a lot of reactors taken offline in the 2000s and 2010s because of economic reasons that couldn't compete in energy marketplaces. That landscape is shifting to level the playing field for nuclear power. But nonetheless, with the established supply base shrinking, requirements still sit far above forecasted available production. So we need to see emerging projects move from development into production, and moreover, spending on exploration and development needs to pace future requirements. And the appetite for new supply has increased as uranium supply and demand fundamentals have exposed a supply deficit that's amplified by Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Now, on the buy side, there's a recognition among buyers that there's a need to support these future sources of uranium as current sources of supply are drawn down. Today, there's a lot more attention on domestic and geopolitically friendly sources of supply than before, and there's a willingness to pay a premium for that security of supply. This is putting pressure on suppliers, however, to find the necessary production capacity to meet emerging demand. And some notable suppliers are responding. Just last month, Urenco approved an investment to expand enrichment capacity at UUSA, and earlier this year, the U.S. government started building a nuclear fuel stockpile. And there are several domestic producers, such as Energy Fuels, who are well positioned to contribute uranium supply from both new and existing mines. So I hope you take away from this broad overview, whether from a global or Western market perspective, that requirements are growing, but so is the supply deficit underneath it, which is drawing ever greater attention to emerging production, just at a time when the competitive landscape is shifting and geopolitics are reshaping commercial strategies. What this is also doing is positioning regional and domestic supplies of fuel to be more competitive in the market. We have significant sources of supply for uranium and uranium processing in North America, like the mill here, and its various sources of ore. And these sources can contribute in a very meaningful way towards securing supply and providing future energy independence for nuclear power operations in the United States. So with that, I'll conclude our overview of the uranium market. Barbecue's just around the corner. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
Some yeah, talking about it. That was 60 million so.
Yes, sir.
What is the lawyer by then? Boy, yeah. So I knew I heard another. Axel was. So I realized no, it's worse. Yeah, think Albert work. So, listen, nothing that. What you right with that we love to get it, punch it, the depths of me.
So if I'm understanding the question, does the deficit prevent capital from flowing into the market because the power plants face a situation where they might be undersupplied? I think by way of background, the best thing I can tell you is that there's never been an instance worldwide where a nuclear power reactor had to shut down for lack of fuel. This market is remarkably resilient when the proper incentive pricing is present. And what we're seeing today is a deficit that's actually incentivizing private equity to come in. And on the one hand, they're looking to capitalize on rising prices by securing pounds themselves. And on the other hand, they're financing new production with a long-term view that this most recent price rise is sustainable. So one of the things I'll point out on this chart is the kind of goldish line, the yellow line. That's a production cost indicator. And what you can see is for some time, our prevailing market prices were beneath the cost of production, right? So that's indicative of an oversupplied market where pounds aren't being sold for what it costs to produce them. That has shifted. That's shifted in a very meaningful way. And you can see where all the indicators were intertwined amongst themselves. That's kind of a market sorting itself out. But what we've seen recently is a rise in prevailing market prices above the cost of production. From an investment standpoint, that's very encouraging. Any other questions? All right, with that, I'll conclude. Thanks for your attention.
Yes. Very good.